My name is Nicole Case. I'm currently a 2L at Hofstra Law School. It's called Maurice A. Dean School of Law. And here at Adam Leitman Bailey, I am a litigation extern. To be honest, while I was here, it really was a diversified daily experience. I never really did the same thing every day, which I think was a highlight, definitely an invaluable experience. But I would say overall, I had a lot of responsibility with either document review or document retrieval for a slew of depositions, all related to one large landlord-tenant case. So that was very interesting and exciting for me to be able to work on a case really from the beginning of when I entered as an extern all the way now towards the end of the externship. So I had a lot to do with that one case, and I learned a lot about all of the plaintiffs, and that was definitely a wonderful experience as well. So some of the attorneys are in person and they come in every day in the office like normal. But because of the pandemic, there are a lot of attorneys that are also working remotely. So I think that it was really unique for me to work with partners that were physically present, and I did have that FaceTime, but then also to work on research projects with partners that weren't actually here physically, but I would call them on the phone and we would discuss cases and what research issues that needed to be done and things of that nature. So that was really interesting to have that interplay between the people who were in the office and the people who weren't, but that definitely was not a barrier for me to network or meet all of the attorneys here. There was definitely options for me to do so, even if they weren't in the office. I think what ended up happening right from the beginning was I was initially assigned a very basic task with regard to that landlord-tenant case that's been litigated since 2013. But after doing that very simple task, I then initiated more of a conversation with the partner, and I wanted to get more involved in the case. So in that way, I was initially given an assignment, but then I took it further and I wanted to get more involved than just that simple assignment. So that's how I got into the whole document retrieval and the document review for the several depositions. I definitely want to land in litigation. That's something that I think I've always had a mind for. When I was a kid, I did mock trial and things like that, and I just found a lot of enjoyment in it. So that's really a huge reason why I went to law school to begin with. And then I wanted to get experience, which is exactly what this was. It was a hands-on experience in litigation, which was wonderful. And I think it only solidified my interest in litigation. I got to witness oral arguments in front of the second department, which was a fantastic experience. And then also the depositions that I mentioned, I was actually invited to sit in on those as well. So that was definitely a wonderful experience as well, because that's a huge stage in litigation. So I think it only solidified my interest in oral advocacy and trial advocacy. I wouldn't say that I'm concentrated in a particular practice area yet. At this stage, I'm only a 2L, so I'm almost halfway done with my law school journey and experience. So I think I wanted to cast a wide net over a lot of practice areas, but still within that litigation sphere. So I would say in that way, litigation is definitely something I want to do, but I think I want to experience a lot of practice areas before I actually settle down into one concentration. First of all, I think that doing an externship or an internship, even if it's while you're actually in law school, is the most invaluable way to gain experience before you actually practice. Not only does it allow you to get hands-on experience, but it also lets you figure out what you like and what you don't like before you actually have to make that decision and it be a lifelong commitment. So in that way, I think doing an externship itself is just something you should absolutely do. Really, regardless of your workload, you can fit it in. It's definitely possible. But as far as here, I think what's unique about this firm is that they do concentrate specifically in real estate litigation, or real estate law rather. So that was a really great experience for me to see a firm that is all working together on one particular concentration. That way to see how it's handled and how real estate actually works. And I really got to get into the nitty-gritty of real estate litigation. Whereas if I did an externship at a general practice or really any other type of government entity or something like that, I would have been able to cast a wide net over a lot of practice areas, but not really get that very, very in-depth rather than depth of breadth. So I really was able to get very deep understanding about one particular practice area, which I think will ultimately help me in deciding what I want to concentrate on. So I think when you enter as an extern, right away I felt like I was a member of the firm, and I was given certain responsibilities that I wasn't necessarily expecting. I think I was more expecting to get clerical administrative work, which I was 100% all for and definitely ready for. But one of the first days I was brought on a deposition. So in that way, I think it was very, very hands-on, way more than I initially anticipated. I can't say that that's necessarily the case for other firms or other externships, because I think they do need paralegal work or administrative work, and that's definitely a good experience, and it's also an invaluable way to get experience. But I think being treated like an attorney from day one is unique, and I think really, really fascinating and really fantastic to be able to do that while you're still a law student. Some of the research projects that I was brought in on, very, very fascinating issues. We had to research what was a certificate of no harassment, specifically in New York. Another one was I was brought in on a civil RICO case, which is unique because usually we learn about RICO, at least in law school, from a criminal perspective. So that was really interesting. And I also just recently partnered with one of the partners to do a research project specifically dealing with what constitutes reasonable accommodation with respect to a landlord-tenant dispute and what needs to be fixed, if it needs to be fixed, if the landlord has documentation of a tenant's medical reasoning for fixing a certain thing in the actual building, if that constitutes a reasonable accommodation. The research projects alone were not only fascinating, but I was really able to get in-depth research experience for issues that I had never seen before. So I think that that will ultimately happen in practice. So being able to do that and being able to ask questions at this extern level is, again, one of the most invaluable experiences I think you can get while you're in law school. It's literally taking what you learn in the classroom and putting it into practice before you practice. So I really can't see a downside to it. But in addition to the research projects that I was brought in on, like I mentioned, worked on this large landlord-tenant case with all those depositions. So that was a really interesting case as well. There was initially 20 plaintiffs suing a commercial landlord. I won't go really much into more detail about that, but it was just a really interesting case. We had to search through medical records and documents, thousands and thousands of documents with all of the plaintiffs. So document review too is such an important thing to be able to do and be able to know what's important, what's not important, and then what to take into a deposition, and then what to do with the deposition information after it's over. So all of that information, all of that skill, I was able to learn still while I'm in law school. So I, again, really think that doing this at ALBPC is really just a wonderful experience. Right now, I'm working on an article about eminent domain, so I'll give a brief overview of what that is. So they call it the Takings Clause in the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution, which initially says that no person should be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, and then also that no private property should be taken by the government without just compensation and for it to be used for a public purpose. So with that said, there's a lot of cases that don't necessarily follow that immediate structure, and there are a lot of cases where the government takes private property and then and says that there are certain redevelopment plans, certain private entities need to build shopping malls and things of that nature, and then they don't actually build it. So while initially it's supposed to remedy economic blight in a community, it ends up actually hurting the community more, because without that, basically what you're left with is either lots of vacant land or condemned buildings or abandoned buildings in the middle of communities. And that's definitely not good for economic blight. It actually furthers it. So it's a bit hypocritical in the actual implementation of this eminent domain doctrine. So that's what I've been working on. I've been working closely with the managing partner here, Adam Leitman Bailey. And that was another great experience to be able to write something that maybe possibly could get published. So just from a law student perspective, that's amazing. So hopefully that does happen, and that would be great exposure as well. But also the research and the writing, and I really got to hone in on a lot of legal research and legal writing skills, which will take me very far in my career. I really do believe that. So another great aspect of this externship, I would say. If you're interested in any type of litigation or transactional role, this is where to be. I had a friend who was an extern who was in a different department than I was. So I was a litigation extern. I focused primarily on litigation and lawsuits. But one of my friends who also was a classmate of mine at Hofstra Law was a transactional extern. And I heard about his experience, and it really differed from mine. So I think in that way, it really can be a diverse experience. Just because you don't want to go into litigation doesn't mean that you can't get amazing experience out of this externship. But if you're considering transactional law, law, I know that my friend was able to go to several closings and kind of be the lead attorney at those closings. So I think that I've never heard of that, something like that happening at another firm or another externship or internship or even a summer job. Usually they start you off very slow. But this friend of mine was kind of thrown right into closings and was sitting at the table with all the documents. It was really a hands-on experience for him as well. So I think it depends on what you want to do for sure. But I think at this stage, if you're in law school, you probably don't know 100% what you want to do. That's, I think, a fair statement. And I think really get as much experience as you can. And then through doing things like this that are experiential learning opportunities, you'll figure out what ultimately you do want to do. And you can't lose from doing something like this. So I would say, regardless of what you want to end up doing in your practice of law, I think you should do this. Elevator pitch.